Can everybody hear me okay? I feel like you can hear me okay. Yes. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, my name is Andrew Hare. I am the product manager for faculty activity reporting. I've been really enjoying just hearing some of the conversations that have been going on, and I'd love to participate some more. I also am here with Melissa, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Melissa Miller. I'm the faculty activity and reporting analyst from Boise State University.
There we are. So Melissa and I have been collaborating on this presentation about activity classifications in faculty activity reporting. I know there's a fair number of people in the room who are using faculty activity reporting. Actually, show of hands, who is using faculty activity reporting? Yeah, great. Follow-up question, who has some experience with activity classifications in faculty activity reporting? Yep. Okay, great. So we're going to start out today. We're going to talk through kind of doing an overview a little bit about activity classification, some high-level stuff. We're going to talk through, and then I'll do that bit. Going to pass it over because I think the more interesting part, I'm not saying my stuff isn't interesting. So my stuff is very interesting, but I think that Melissa has got some really interesting kind of use cases and applications for activity classifications at Boise State. She's going to talk through a little bit how they're using activity classifications. And then we wanted to keep some time at the end to keep the conversation that's been going in the room going, to think about and brainstorm together about some other potential creative uses for activity classifications, maybe answer some questions and collaborate a little bit. One of the great things about these conferences is, from my perspective as a product manager, getting to talk to people who are in the platform every day, who are using it with faculty. And then also, I think for you all, talking with me or talking with each other. So I'm hoping we can spark some conversation around the creative use of activity classifications today. So let's start with that overview. Broadly speaking, I'm not going to spend too much time on this. I feel like this is a pretty experienced group. But in FAR, activity classifications are supplemental metadata. So they can take a lot of different forms, but in a nutshell, if you wanted to just say, what are they for? It's for highlighting what your faculty are doing. There are, set data types in FAR that are kind of almost like siloed in a way. So you're talking about, let's say, this is a book. I've produced this book, and there's certain things that we expect to see for that data type, but then activity classifications are like, yeah, but what else? What did this do? What are some how can we tie this thematically to other things that we care about at our institution? So it's got that kind of enrichment function. So there in FAR there's default activity classifications. These are things that we anticipate kind of everybody would want to use or have at least available. But and those are great. I think the thing that's even more fascinating though is the option to customize activity classifications. So here is where an institution can get really creative with essentially what are you trying to surface in terms of what your faculty are doing. And interestingly, we'll talk about this more with activity classifications. They can cut across data types. So if you're thinking about data types as kind of like vertical, so these are books, and these are presentations, and these are something completely different. That's service activity or something. An activity classification can go across all of those and tell you what do they have in common or what do they not have in common because of how you can set them up. So kind of leads nicely into my next slide, almost like I planned it, but I didn't. The setup of the activity classifications, I'm going to show you a little bit more about what this looks like. It's a flexible toolkit. There's a lot of different options. Things you'd expect: multiple choice, individual choice, text fields, dates. There's a pretty wide variety of different things that activity classifications can be, and there's a lot of different ways that they can be used. So the scenarios that I was just talking about are things like reporting insights, where you can create activity classifications that can then be used as in a variety of different like filter settings on reports. That's kind of a generic use of activity classifications. Another thing is the activity classification data can feed into accreditation reports as well. For example, like the AACSB has a lot of specific activity classifications that are a way of kind of having that data be surfaced in those reports. So broadly speaking, that's some information that just kind of sets the stage for what activity classifications are, how they're used. I just wanted to show this setup here. This is on the administration setup page for the activity classification. I'm kind of creating a new one. I'm going to make it as a date type. You'll be able to see. I can't pause this, but here you can see these are activity and profile sections that I could assign it to. I chose mentoring and advising. And then as I go in as a faculty member here, there is that activity classification that's a date. So that's kind of broadly speaking how you set them up and use them. And then here is a really straightforward, just quick share of how this could be used in a report. I can apply this activity classification as a filter on this report. So I'm going to do that. And then, in that case, I said is institutional. I could also get rid of that filter. So you can use those filters on reports in different ways. Again, I'm changing it here to instead of is professional. It's hard to read. I need to get these glasses checked out. I think that's a pretty straightforward example of how I'm using that as a filter on the reports. Going back to this overview idea, though, what is this for? I'm trying to show here that this is a way of surfacing insights about what your faculty are doing. The other thing I wanted to mention is kind of actual use cases. I think I did some analysis about activity classifications. I looked at kind of an overview of how activity classifications are being used by everybody. Looked at some of our data, and I did find some interesting trends. And it got me thinking. So the most common type of activity classification that we have that everybody's using is the select list type. And Melissa's going to talk about this a little bit more. I think one thing with activity classifications is I'm talking about how they're used and the benefits that they can have. But there is also a cost. And the cost is always the same, which is time. So if you create these activity classifications, they can be very useful. But also, somebody needs to fill them out. Who is that going to be? There's different ways that you can get that data in, but a lot of times this is going to come back to faculty. So you want to be really, I think my take on this is, one of the reasons that the select list type is so popular is, number one, you're kind of reducing the chance of error in data entry because you're giving a pre-populated list to your faculty. You're saying, when you're thinking about this activity, here's a list. Tell me which one of the things is on this list. Don't start from scratch. Don't make up your own. Here's the list of things, and you pick one. So it reduces the risk. It also kind of makes it easy to fill out. So I think in the interest of time, the select list type is very popular, and it's not close. I mean, it's the most popular by far of our activity classification types. So I thought that was interesting, some interesting insight. Also, I was going to say, of course, scholarship insight is where activity classifications are going to be getting used the most. So the example that I came up with is, what type of book is this? That's a very popular one. And then also the other most popular use of activity classifications is around identifying relevant data for accreditation reports. I alluded to that earlier. let me just see. I think, yes, excellent. Okay, so that's kind of some of the groundwork for, broadly speaking, what activity classifications are, how they're being used, and kind of some general context about them. I think we should switch over, Melissa, to what Boise State has been doing with activity classifications, kind of their unique use case, and you can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and just to give you a little bit of context, Boise State University is located in Boise, Idaho. We have about 850 full-time faculty members, about 27,000 undergraduate students. So just wanted to set the stage for you there, and about 10-ish colleges. So the first example that we have of an activity classification, as I've been preparing for this with Andrew that we were talking about, is with our grant data, we have an activity classification for faculty members to input information about whether it's an OSP grant, a non-OSP grant, or a pre-proposal. And this is something that we update every month. So we get a file from our OSP office and input all OSP grants. During annual evaluations, this can be a little bit tricky because if it is in a pre-proposal state, people often want to enter that because it's not part of our file. If they enter an OSP grant, then it gets overridden. And so,
can you say what an OSP grant is versus a non-OSP grant?
Yes, it's the Office of Sponsored Programs, and we use InfoEd for that. Makes sense. So that is a way for us to determine which grants people are inputting that are not part of our file. So if they want something to show up, that's an easy way for us to just kind of delineate between what would be part of our file and overridden and what would be something else. And we also are in the process of looking at including pre-proposals as part of our upload, but that's a way, during annual evaluations, if it's not approved yet, for that to still show up in their annual activity report.
This reminds me, one thing that I was going to say earlier that I forgot is talking about, so in this example, when Melissa said this, my eyes kind of lit up because I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that. This is a way for you to tell, as you're saying, which data should be overwritten and which should be kept. And the other thing that I was thinking about was the activity classification data itself can be loaded. So in this case, there's a grant load that goes from your institutional grants to FAR, because that's the source of record is kind of what is it called again? The source of record for grants?
We get it from the OSP office, but it's through InfoEd.
Okay, InfoEd. That's what I was thinking of. But another thing to think about with activity classifications, again, in terms of the data governance, if you have a source of data for this activity classification that's outside of FAR, this data can be loaded, that is, activity classification data can be loaded into FAR in bulk. So if the concern is around, manual entry for faculty, this is something that can be mitigated with a bulk load of activity classification data. Sorry, please continue.
I'm still learning a little bit about this myself. So, and then the next example that we've talked about that really was my primary example as we started preparing for this is our College of Business and Economics. As Andrew mentioned, we use activity classifications for some AACSB purposes in that accreditation. The other thing that the College of Business and Economics does is they assign quality points to their publications, and that connects to their teaching load. So they have to get a certain amount of quality points that sort of equates to what their teaching load will be for the following semester. And in order to do that, we have them, right now we have an activity classification for the quality points that are assigned to a particular publication. That actually comes from the percentile based on, the peer-reviewed publication that it's coming from and what their rating is and what year that is. So it's a little bit of a complicated equation that goes into that. But what we were finding is there's a lot of manual entry issues with this in general. But one of them is that they were not correctly equating those numbers. So they would have a percentile that doesn't align with the number of quality points. So we had those as two separate activity classifications, and what we're trying to do right now is combine those to make just one activity classification that says you were in this percentile category, so that equates to this number of quality points. So just to kind of mitigate incorrect calculations by faculty members in order to like pull a quick report and get that information for administrators.
And also, we talked about this as well, that giving them that list type was a safer, in terms of getting the correct data or getting closer to the correct data. So that's another example when I was saying earlier, like the list type, this is maybe why one of the reasons the list type is more popular, both from the, from a reporting perspective, making sure it's accurate, but also as quick as possible for faculty to go in and just say, it's this, it's this. Yeah.
I think another sub-example that sort of belongs in that category is around somebody from the president's office recently asked us for information about community partnerships. And so often that is connected to service learning or service activities that faculty put in, but not always. We have a lot of things that are like not official service assignments. There are also things that span over, research or teaching that would have an external partnership component, and they wanted a better way of capturing that information. So we added a new activity and then added activity classifications into that to say, is this teaching, is this research, is this service, or is this some sort of combination or something else, so that we could more easily capture that data in a report.
It's super interesting. I think you were at the table with me when we were talking about this. So one thing that can be challenging, and I've seen a lot of different solutions to this, we were having sort of a high level kind of philosophical conversation about how to organize research, teaching, and service. These are broadly the three categories of, contribution to the academy. I've seen a lot of different, this is always coming up in the workload conversation, but just generally speaking, I've seen a lot of different approaches to this. In FAR, I've seen where the section itself is labeled, and there will be, like, for example, 4 sections that are capturing research-related things and a couple of sections that are capturing teaching type of things, and it's actually labeled like that. But this is a different approach entirely. When I was saying about activity classifications can kind of make that horizontal cut across different data types, this approach would be, say there's an activity classification for research, and that's a way to identify across different sections, this activity type should be considered towards research or teaching or service. And that gives you, from my perspective, then on a report, that's a very useful filter. And it kind of addresses one of the tricky things, which is sometimes these things are objectively difficult to categorize. Is this advising related to teaching, or is this advising like a service related activity? Or, so activity classifications can definitely be used, for that as well.
Yeah. And I think just this is an ongoing conversation, as I'm sure it's happening in other campuses as well, that faculty activities are complicated and vast and hard to delineate into these categories. And so I think we have to constantly be just adjusting for just to make sure that we're recognizing the work that they're doing. So the last one on here is aggregate and organize activity data across different sections. So the other example I wanted to talk about it, and I inherited this system, so I'm still navigating, like what is adjustable and what they set up in a certain way for a particular reason. But we have 5 different sections in the activities for service, and 4 of those sections have a metric for hours that ask specifically for the number of hours that they're spending in that service component. So it's Boise State service, community service. If they're reviewing or editing something, there's a couple of other ones in there. But one of them, as I found out, doesn't include a number of hours. And so it makes it hard to compare apples to apples if we don't have that metric across all 5 of those categories, as people are trying to kind of do a study on equity within a department in terms of who's doing the most service. So that has been something that we're just kind of thinking about as we not only update some of our activity classifications, but as we also think about how we want that to look in the future.
Yeah, 100%. I think two things occur to me when you're talking about this. One is, again, coming back to time as being the limiting factor, period, in human activity, but also it being very important. This is an example of using an activity classification to, I think, the insight that you're surfacing is around making some of that invisible surface work visible. So you're saying it's this number of hours. That's one, very concrete, tangible approach to tackling that problem, which I know we're all talking about. I think there's actually a table called like invisible service activities, hidden service activities. So, I mean, this is exactly it. So you have something that's there, but how do you quantify it? How do you talk about it in a meaningful way? Time is definitely one of those approaches. It's not the only one, but it's one. The other thing that I was going to say, and I just thought about this, was so one thing that we're trying to do, that we're always trying to do at Interfolio, at Elsevier, and kind of from a product perspective in general, is thinking about what are you trying to accomplish with this customized activity classification? And for example, this might be a good example where you're talking about number of hours. Is this something that we just need to have standard in our data model? Does this need to be productized? Is there another tool that needs to be built to capture this? Is there another way that we could make this easier to do? If we see enough of a trend of a particular thing that needs to be built, or a custom thing that needs to be built that everybody is actually doing that kind of the same, that might be an indication to us that we need to think about, hey, this might be something that this might be a use case that we actually need to productize, that we need to make this into a function of the product. So activity classifications give us some direction on that, because if we see trends in the data, it might be indicating, well, this is something when we implement a new client, we should just include this as a standard activity classification moving forward, for example. So that one was really fascinating as well. Melissa, was there something else you wanted to mention, or I think those are the main things?
The only thing that I just kind of back to my example with the College of Business and Economics, as we're trying to make that transition, I think, we've had a lot of questions about how we transition that so that we don't lose data. Also, like, you can set up activity classifications at the university level or the college level, and that's just been a consideration as we're we want them to appear in a particular order. We can't order them if they're at the university level, but within the college level. So there have been a few just considerations as we're kind of thinking about how to adjust things. And I think that's really, in preparing to present for this, I maybe had more questions and answers about how to do this. So that's been really interesting to learn about and think about, like I said, not only adjusting them, but kind of thinking about how we want to set that up for the future too.
It's a great point. I didn't say this earlier, and I do want to. I know we need to get to Q&A, but one thing is talking about the demand, the time demand thing. I think it's very important to be able to be selective about what activity classifications are universally needed. To be very choosy about what those are. Those need to be things that would be institution-wide. And when they are institution-wide, there should be a real benefit to having that be institution-wide in terms of the insights that you're gathering. So it should be relevant to all faculty or relevant to all one set of activity. Because if it's not, you have the option to say, this is an important activity classification, but only for the College of Business, for example. I mean, I think AACSB is a very obvious example of this. If you're requiring all your faculty to fill out the AACSB classification, don't do that, by the way. I'm saying don't do that. But that would be a perfect example of what not to do. Because then the problem is you're adding, every time you're adding a field onto a form, that's a cost. That's a time cost. So you have to think about it that way and say, is this something that's absolutely needed on this form? If it's not, then fortunately you can adjust. So you can say, okay, this should only show on the College of Business form. This is what we were talking about, and nowhere else. Like, it's not relevant anywhere else. So it's helpful to kind of tailor that to the specific needs of the individual college or school, however the organizational hierarchy is split up. Yeah. I think that's the end of that thought. I feel like I kind of came into that ending running a little bit, but here we are. Yeah. What are some other possibilities? Okay, so the idea here that Melissa and I had was just when we were talking about this, the two of us was a very fruitful conversation about how they were using activity classifications at Boise State, how they could be. I feel like even just today we had more. I'm wondering if what we talked about today was sparking any thoughts that you had about how activity classifications are being used at your institution, how they could maybe be used differently, or new novel ideas, or any kind of example of some other possibilities of for activity classifications that we didn't talk about, or aspects of that we didn't talk about.